I wanted to ask, why do you think expats should be considering this part of the world, Ireland, County Clare?
It is, well, that was one of the questions that I found difficult a few months ago. I really would have. When you think about all the places that Live and Invest overseas cover, the exotic tropical places, Vietnam and Belize and all the places like that. It wasn't until I came back recently and I saw there is it's the people, it is the society, it's the sense of community really is what I think sets Ireland apart. You've got lovely nature in other countries, you've certainly got better weather in other places, but yeah, you certainly do. But it's the people and it's how the country works and the general sense of I mentioned it in the article, it's the general sense of belonging you get when you come to Ireland. It just seems familiar to everybody. It's kind of, everyone's met Irish people. Everyone has a certain fondness for the Irish culture. Is what they've been exposed to, and there's a reason beyond just St. Patrick's Day and some Irish music. It's because there is a kind of a community culture in Ireland. People get involved together and they pull together, and they're generally a very friendly and welcoming people. Who enjoy, who are generally not too pretentious about things and generally enjoy just getting together and having fun. That would be a general answer for Ireland. I mean, Ireland 20 years ago was 30 years ago now, I suppose I'm showing my age, was nearly a third world country. It was the poorest country in Europe. There was really nobody wanted to come to Ireland. It was just really tough here. But in 30 years since, we've developed to become one of the most affluent countries in Europe. But we really haven't lost the sense of community or sense of community responsibility that other countries, when they have an economic boom, sometimes lose. So I think that's one of the main reasons.
What about this region in particular? How does it compare to some of the other regions of Ireland?
It's quite different. I mean, if you know Ireland, about a third of the people live in Dublin, which is, the budgies in the background causing trouble. It's my daughter's budgie. There's a third of the population lives in Dublin. All the money's in Dublin, all the major businesses in Dublin. And you've got 3 or 4 main cities. You've got Cork, Galway, in the north of Belfast, but I'm not counting that. And you've got Limerick. So you've got 3 or 4 reasonable sizes. When I say reasonable, you're talking about 100,000 to 200,000 people in Ireland. That's big. And then there's small towns and villages scattered all around Ireland. And County Clare was traditionally the poorest county. It was just sheep farming and then immigration was all that went on in Ireland. Everyone in County Clare, everyone left, and what you have left there now is more a version of traditional Irish, a traditional Irish county. People didn't get swept up in the. Sorry, is that bird? Hear that coming through? I can go to another room if he doesn't hush up. Sorry, that's my daughter's pet.
That's fine, no worries.
So County Clare, the Celtic Tiger came. That was the big boom that Ireland had from about 2000 to 2009. That kind of missed County Clare. There wasn't big boom or bust there. It remained being a farming community that was focusing on tourism. And it just didn't change. It's still quite sparsely developed. It doesn't have a very large population. There's no large towns to speak of. It has just kind of stayed particularly Irish, whereas the other, even Limerick where I live now, I think it's great, but it's really turned quite European. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between Dublin and London and Munich and places like that. They've taken on a European large city feel. County Clare has kept the real Irish feeling.
Nice. You gave us kind of like a really nice rundown of the major towns, I guess, that you find in the region.
Yes.
What would you say were the top 3 that you'd recommend for expats?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on what you want to do, really. I mean, they're towns; they're all real we call them towns, but by anyone else's standards, they're probably villages. The one where I spent my summer holidays as a child, and it's grown a bit, but it still kept a lot of its charm and authenticity. I mean, we went to Lahinch in County Clare. Did I mention it in the article? Yeah, it was me, my 4 siblings, my parents, and Granny. There was 8 of us in a little caravan in County Clare. That must have been fairly intense for my mum, but we loved it. It was the huge beaches. I mean, it's safe. You let the kids, and they still do it here. Kids still run around the streets and off. Kids are still sent out, and in particular in County Clare, sent out in the morning and told to come back. When it starts getting dark. The nanny parenting or the nanny state hasn't arrived in County Clare, and particularly Lahinch. But the places people tend to gravitate to, as I said, Lahinch is lovely. It's probably it's the most. Lahinch would be my favourite coastal place in County Clare. People from Ireland, particularly from County Limerick, where I'm from, they all gravitate to Kilkee. Kilkee is the summer mecca, is the Hamptons for Limerick. But however, I think that's people have gravitated towards there. It's because they go there because everyone they know goes there, and even though it's now become larger than Lahinch. I still prefer Lahinch as a general spot for everyone coming. It's just full of Limerick people who I get to see every day anyway, so I don't holiday there. The other places that are definitely worth checking out, and you'll probably have to drive through, I mentioned Ennistimon, which isn't on the coast. It's about 4 or 5 miles from Lahinch. That's a really booming little cultural small town. Small town. I mean, I couldn't believe what had happened there in the 5 years since I'd actually stopped there myself. It is just crawling with art galleries and live music and little craft eateries that didn't exist before. And my favorite of the small villages when I toured there last month, when I toured around last month to get my final look over the villages for the article, was Ballyvaughan, which is pretty much the northernmost village in County Clare. It borders on the Burn and borders on County Galway. It's just a lovely, picturesque little village, picture postcard village, and the people were just wonderful there. So I suppose you said pick 3. There's 5, five of the best.
So thinking more about the community and the lifestyle in this region, you said that there's not much of a visible expat community because they blend in so well with the local population.
Yes. Yeah, and that's, when I wrote it, I thought about it for a while, and it still rings true. I find, having lived in various other countries, I mean, expats tend to band together for social connection and for I'd say protection, but it's not, usually physical protection, but protection of a group where you can get advice from people where there might be a language barrier. If you're moving to Vietnam, there's a language barrier. You don't know the customs and traditions. You don't know when dealing with people, are they going to treat you differently because you're a foreigner? Do you need to, get all your advice? And I found in Belize it was exceptionally valuable that you get involved in the expat groups so as you could get all this local knowledge, so as you don't end up overpaying for things, you don't make mistakes, there's all these cultural norms and processes that were different over there, and joining an expat group I use protection, but for our own to be able to help each other out was necessary. But it just doesn't seem to happen in Ireland. I mean, people come to Ireland and they end up dissolving into their own groups of friends. They don't need to gang together. The culture is so familiar to people. There's no real culture shock when you think about it. There's aspects of the Irish culture that everyone in the world are familiar with. And when you come to Ireland, you realise that it's all fairly familiar. All the norms, how people interact. I mean, it's all very familiar to people. There's no us and them divide between locals and outsiders, because there isn't a wealth gap between people coming in and people here. So it isn't the locals people looking at the outsiders coming in with envy. Or trying to rip them off or trying to scam them out of things. That doesn't really it doesn't really happen because there isn't a divide, there isn't a cultural divide like that, or an economic divide. So sometimes you might find that two Americans might end up being friends while they're in Ireland, but it's not necessarily, that's because they're two guys that became friends. It's not because they banded together so they could survive, get through all the tough situations that they find themselves in Ireland, because that doesn't really happen. I mean, it's crime isn't an issue, violence isn't an issue. The whole process information is easily, readily available from all the government offices. There isn't a bureaucracy that tries to keep the information from you. Freedom of information is quite strong here. So all those reasons you might find yourselves in a kind of expat enclave in other countries, you just wouldn't. You'd be denying yourself. You'd be denying yourself some of the upsides of coming to Ireland by just sticking together in a foreigner clique.